close your eyes and let the day loosen its hold a little more. Let the edges of the room grow softer, and let the world that asked things of you grow quiet for a while. Tonight, we will travel far from clocks and city lights, far from hurried voices and bright windows, to a place where rivers move with patient memory, where mountain ridges hold clouds like folded silk, and where a legend once shimmered upon still water with the color of gold. This is the story of El Dorado, though not quite in the way it is often told. It is not only the story of treasure seekers and vanished maps. It is also the story of a sacred landscape, of a ritual misunderstood, of dreams that changed shape each time they crossed another river, another language, another century. It is the story of a city that was never fully a city, of gold that was not first meant to be possessed, and of the strange tenderness with which the earth keeps what is offered to it. So we will move slowly, the way water moves through threads. The land will appear before the legend, and the ritual before the rumor, and the rumor before the long wandering search that followed. If thoughts of treasure begin to sharpen, we can return to the river. If the old hunger of distant empires begins to rise, we can return to the lake. If names and routes and journeys begin to feel too vivid, we can look again at mist among the trees, and at dawn lying softly over a high plain. El Dorado has remained out of reach for centuries. It can wait a little longer while you drift. So now imagine the northern reaches of South America, before any European ship had turned such stories into letters and plan. Imagine the morning beginning slowly there, not in one instant, but in layers. The air is cool and wet. Dew rests on leaves broad enough to catch whole beads of silver light. Buttressed roots rise from the earth like old walls shaped by living wood. Somewhere in the green distance, a bird calls once, then lets the silence close over it again. A branch bends above dark water. A faint splash lifts from a riverbank and is gone. The forest does not wake with noise. It stirs as though it remembers a rhythm older than urgency, and follows it faithfully. That is where we begin. Not with a city of gold, but with green shade, slow rivers, and the patient breath of a land that had always been enough for those who knew how to listen. Across this vast northern reach of the continent, water shaped nearly everything. Rivers came down from cold mountain springs and wandered through valleys, then widened into basins where the light lay flat upon them. Some slipped northward toward the Orinoco. Some turned south and east into systems that would one day be gathered under the name of the Amazon. Some spread into marshes where reeds and sedges made whole quiet worlds at the water's edge. To a traveler who looked only once, the network might have seemed confusing, almost impossible, a labyrinth of currents and branches and flooded paths. But to those who lived among them, the waterways were not disorder. They were roads. They were memory moving. There were communities along high plateaus, communities in fertile valleys, communities near lakes, whose surfaces seemed to hold sky so faithfully that the difference between above and below sometimes grew uncertain. Trails crossed cool uplands and descended into warmer, low country. Goods moved slowly and steadily. Salt, woven cloth, food, carved objects, stone, emeralds, crafted metal. Knowledge moved too, though not in books. It moved in spoken stories, in ritual gestures, in inherited roots, in songs remembered at the right season, in the names of places that did not simply describe the land, but recognized it. Far off, mountain chains rose pale blue beneath the early light. Clouds gathered along their shoulders and slipped apart again, as if the heights themselves were breathing. At night, those same ridges held the stars very near. On clear evenings, the skies seemed deep and close at once, a black stillness crowded with points of white fire. Those who climbed high enough might feel that the world below had quieted so completely that the heavens had lowered to listen. Such landscapes invite legends even when no one has yet named them as legends. They hold shape and silence in proportions that allow the imagination to settle into them. And then there were the lakes, Some lay wide and exposed to the moving sky. Others rested in bowls of land, ringed by reeds or steep earth or dark, damp grass. The light changed them hour by hour. At dawn they could be gray and almost silver. At noon they could flash green or turquoise or white. In late light they could gather the sun and hold it in broken ripples of amber and gold. To stand at such a shore and see that shift would be to understand how easily a glimmer upon water could become a thought, and how a thought, repeated enough, could become a story. But in the beginning, the glimmer did not yet promise treasure. It simply belonged to the world itself, to the strange generosity of light meeting surface. In this land, before the legend was inflated and exported and chased, there already existed abundance of another kind. There was expertise, there was reverence, there was trade refined through repetition and trust. There were sacred places where the human world touched something older and less visible. And there was gold, yes, but not as Europe would later imagine it. Not as locked wealth, not as proof of superiority, not as streets and walls waiting to be stripped and counted. Gold here could mean light, offering, continuity, relation. It could mean that something beautiful had been shaped for the sake of spirit rather than possession. The land knew this before the rumor did, and if we are to follow El Dorado gently, we must know it too. Among the peoples of the highlands, the Muisca shaped a life both practical and ceremonial, attentive to what was needed and equally attentive to what was sacred. They lived upon cool plateaus where the air moved cleanly, where fields and settlements stood within reach of lakes long held in reverence, and where trade joined communities in careful reciprocity. Salt moved outward from their lands. Textiles moved with it. Emeralds glowed green in the hand and found their way into exchange. Gold was worked into forms at once delicate and radiant, not to imitate the weight of the sun, but to acknowledge it. To the Muisca, gold was not only value, it was presence. It was sunlight made touchable. It was warmth translated into metal. It was a material suitable for prayer, because it seemed already halfway divine, carrying the brightness of the sky into human hands. Small figures known now as toños were fashioned and offered. Ornaments were created not merely to display skill, though skill there certainly was, but to participate in a larger order that joined people, ancestors, lakes, and unseen powers together. Gold moved through ritual, it entered water, it became part of exchanges in which the point was not retention, but relation. This difference matters deeply, because it is here that the later misunderstanding begins. When one culture encounters a shining material and thinks first of accumulation, while another encounters the same material and thinks of offering, an entire legend can be born in the gap between them. Yet before that gap widened, the Muisca understood perfectly well what they were doing. They stood at the edges of sacred places with intention. They shaped objects that would not remain in private possession. They sent brightness away from themselves and into the keeping of water. One of the most enduring accounts connected with the Muisca tells of the elevation of a new ruler. It is easy now to say the words quickly, as though they were part of a familiar summary. A chief was covered in gold dust and taken upon a raft onto a lake. But the summary is too thin. It does not contain the wind before dawn. It does not contain the smoke of resins curling into pale morning air. It does not contain the silence of those gathered along the shore, who were not spectators to spectacle, but participants in a threshold moment. Imagine that morning slowly. The chosen leader has undergone purification. He has abstained, prepared, passed through the inward disciplines required before outward authority can be recognized. Priests move nearby. Bowls hold incense, resins, powders, drums sound, but softly enough that they seem to organize intention more than noise. The air above the lake is cool. The first light is just beginning to reach the water. Reeds along the edge move in small whispers. Those assembled do not crowd or cheer. They wait. Then the gold dust is applied, fine and bright. It settles against skin until the human body itself seems transformed into a living reflection of dawn. Not plated in the sense of armor, not burdened by metal, but touched with it, breathed upon by brightness. On the raft, attended by ritual specialists, the gleaming figure moves away from shore. The water accepts the vessel. The crowd remains still. The farther the raft drifts toward the center, the more the chief becomes both man and symbol, individual and offering, body and light. When the appointed place is reached, gifts are given to the lake. Gold figures, emeralds, other objects shaped for sacred exchange. They sink, ripples widen, then smooth themselves away. At last the gilded leader enters the water, and the dust leaves him, dissolving into the depths, returning the brightness to the place from which its meaning came. Authority is not established here through proclamation alone, nor through possession, nor through force displayed before others. It is established through relation. To water, to spirits, to community, to continuity. The lake receives the brilliance. The leader emerges changed, but not enriched in any material sense. There in that quiet ceremony lives the heart of what would become El Dorado. Not a city, not a vault, not an avenue paved with wealth. A human figure briefly radiant, a sacred lake, and gifts surrendered to what cannot be controlled. Stories rarely remain where they begin. They travel in fragments, and fragments are seldom obedient. A gesture becomes a phrase becomes an image, once removed from the world that gave it meaning, begins to draw new meanings into itself. So it was with the Muisca ritual. It moved outward, not as a carefully translated account of symbolic gold and sacred water, but as pieces of wonder carried by merchants, messengers, intermediaries, soldiers, and opportunists. Somewhere along the way, the ritual was made smaller in one sense and larger in another. Smaller in understanding, larger in fantasy. To speak of a man covered in gold dust is already to offer something vivid to distant ears. The mind sees him before it understands him. Add a sacred lake. Add offerings of emeralds and metal cast into the water. Add the fact that these offerings are not recovered. Now remove the cultural framework that explains devotion and replace it with a framework obsessed with extraction and display. The result is not merely confusion, it is an engine. An entire machine of desire begins to turn. Across the Atlantic, in the first decades after European contact with the Americas had opened so many new routes for greed and astonishment alike, such fragments fell upon fertile ground. Men had already heard of rich territories elsewhere. Ships returned with silver. Reports from distant lands carried accounts of unfamiliar peoples and material abundance. The world seemed to be enlarging faster than anyone could properly understand it. Under such conditions, restraint is not the quality that thrives most easily. Imagination does. So does appetite. A man glittering with gold became, in some retellings, evidence that his people must possess limitless stores of the metal. Offerings into water became signs of excess rather than devotion. A single ritual center became, by degrees, the edge of a broader kingdom. Soon the thought arose almost naturally. If one ruler can shine like this, what must his seat of power look like? If a lake can receive such offerings, what greater source of wealth must feed them? The question itself did much of the work. It invited completion by the listener, and what listeners most often completed was not sacred meaning, but treasure. There is something dreamlike in the way such a transformation happens. No one necessarily decides, in one dramatic moment, to invent a city of gold out of almost nothing. Rather, each retelling brightens the old fragments a little more. The story becomes easier to repeat when it promises abundance. It becomes easier to carry when it offers ambition, a destination. A gilded man can be admired. A kingdom of gold can be pursued. And so the whisper that first rose from water and ritual drifted into another age and another language. It crossed desks and taverns and camps. It entered maps before it deserved to. It passed through mouths that had never seen the highlands, never smelled the reeds near the sacred lake, never understood why gold might be cast away on purpose. That loss of understanding did not weaken the story. It strengthened its pull, for a misunderstanding attached to desire often travels farther than truth attached to reverence. By the time the legend settled into European consciousness, it had already begun to move. It no longer pointed clearly back toward one lake or one people. It opened outward, somewhere beyond the ridges, somewhere inland, somewhere upriver, somewhere in a country not yet named properly, where gold did not merely glimmer, but gathered itself into walls, courtyards, temples, and streets. The city had not yet fully formed, but the space for it had been prepared. It would rise not from stone, but from repetition. And once a story promises that a place exists just beyond the edge of what is known, there will always be men willing to go looking for it. Preparations began, not with certainty, but with expectation arranged to look like certainty. Letters were written, provisions were gathered, guides were consulted, horses were loaded where horses could go, and boats were readied where they could not. Names we now remember in history: conquistadors, leaders of expeditions, men whose ambitions were larger than their maps came into relation with the rumor of immense inland wealth. Yet the land before them was not blank. In European eyes, it may have appeared insufficiently mapped, but it had long been traversed, named, exchanged across, and understood by those who belonged to it. This matters because the expeditions that followed moved along routes already known in other ways. They entered valleys where people had traded for generations. They followed river corridors that had carried stories and goods long before they carried Spanish hopes. They rode or walked across high plains where the wind had already shaped memory into the grass. They did not create paths so much as misread the purpose of existing one. At first, the movement itself could sustain belief. To travel through such varied country is to feel perpetually on the verge of revelation. One day brings stony rises and clear air. The next opens into warmer ground, thick with moisture and insects, the river broadening and bending through reeds. Then come wetlands where sound is muted and travel slows. Then narrow channels again, then uplands, then cloud. In such shifting landscapes, inconsistency does not discourage the imagination. It feeds it. If the destination is not here, perhaps it is beyond the next ridge. If not that ridge, then behind the one after. If not in this basin, then in the next drainage, the next valley, the next interior sea of green. Every small encounter with worked gold strengthened the pursuit. A pendant, a nose ornament, a ceremonial object, an elegantly shaped piece of metal from a community that used gold skillfully and meaningfully. Such things ought to have suggested localized artistry and ritual richness. Instead, to many seekers, they functioned as proof that much more waited farther in. A crafted object in the hand became an entire imagined district in the mind. A small gleam became a city. It is astonishing how quickly the human imagination can construct paved avenues from a single ornament. And yet disappointment never arrived with enough force to end the dream. This is one of the legend's deepest strengths. The search did not fail cleanly. It failed softly, repeatedly, ambiguously. Men found enough to remain convinced that more existed. They heard enough contradictions to believe that the truer source simply had not yet been reached. Indigenous testimonies, local guidance, rumor, miscommunication, wishful interpretation, and the vastness of the land itself all combined to keep certainty suspended. Such suspension is very good for legends. It allows them to breathe, so let us picture one of these slow journeys, without forcing it into adventure. The river is carrying a small group through dim morning mist. Oars enter and leave the water with a rhythm more soothing than dramatic. The banks are dense with vegetation. Rain has passed and left broad leaves shining. Now and then someone points to a glint in stone or to a distant clearing. A story is repeated softly in the boat, not the same way it was told yesterday, but near enough. Somewhere ahead there is a people wealthy beyond measure. Somewhere beyond that, perhaps a city. No one can say where with any precision. Still, the current moves them onward. Nights are spent on damp ground or near a rise judged safe enough. Gear is mended. Food is measured. Insects hum. The darkness holds more sound than sight. Talk returns to the possibility of arrival, but rarely to doubt. Doubt is present, of course, but in such settings it often disguises itself as persistence. One more day, one more tributary, one more report from someone who claims to have heard from someone else. The legend needs only this much to survive, not proof, but continuation. And after these loops of movement, after the maps shift and the reports swell, and the city glides from one imagined location to another, it helps to return to still water again, to remember that the story began not in motion, but in ritual quiet. So after the oars and the hoofbeats and the wet leather and the shifting sky, imagine again a lake at dawn. Imagine the surface untroubled. Imagine gold not as destination, but as offering. That return is important. It is the only way to keep the legend from becoming entirely someone else's hunger. As years passed, the legend of El Dorado became more mobile than any expedition. It learned how to detach itself from disappointing geography. When one route failed, it drifted elsewhere. When one testimony led only to ordinary settlements, ordinary in the sense that no impossible city stood there, another report shifted the dream toward a new interior. Some placed it among the Andes, hidden in valleys wrapped in cloud. Some drew it toward wide eastern plains, where the horizon itself seemed to withhold a secret. Some sent it deeper into forests, others into lands of flood and river, where the sky repeated itself in every channel. What moved was not only location, but scale. The original image of the gilded man had already been enlarged into something like a kingdom. Now even that kingdom began to dissolve into a broader and brighter fantasy. Not simply a ruler blessed with gold, not even a settlement rich in ornaments and ritual objects. A city, then a capital, then in some tellings, an entire shining realm. Gold spread across imagined walls, roofs, avenues, ceremonial spaces, reservoirs, and halls. The more impossible the city became, the less likely ordinary failure could disprove it. The legend had become too large to confront directly. This is why it endured. It was always, in a sense, next, always not here. Therefore not yet disproven. Maps recorded names that later maps moved or erased. One chronicler wrote with confidence, another with caution, a third with embellishment so smooth it passed for testimony. European readers, far from the river mud and mountain cold in which these stories struggled to maintain shape, received them as part travel account, part invitation. The unfamiliar lands of the Americas had already shown that what once seemed incredible could, at times, prove materially true. Why not this as well? Why not just one more hidden greatness waiting inland? Yet the land itself kept answering in more subtle ways. It offered rivers rather than boulevards, high plains rather than plazas, sacred lakes rather than treasuries. It offered communities with systems of meaning and exchange that were complex, but not arranged to fulfill European fantasy. It offered artifacts, yes, but not the hordes those artifacts were made to imply. The mismatch between expectation and reality ought to have ended the search. Instead, it made the search recursive. Every lack of confirmation became evidence that the seekers had been close, but not close enough. Among the many names attached to these endeavors, among the expeditions crossing high country and low river basin, what we see most clearly from a distance is not triumph, but repetition. Men go, men hear, men misread, men continue their letters home, describe hardships, but often with that peculiar mixture of complaint and exhilaration that keeps ambition alive. The path is difficult, therefore the reward must justify it. The farther inland they go, the more the story asks to be believed. It would be wasteful, after all, to have suffered so much for nothing. In this way, hardship becomes an accomplice to hope. And yet, tonight, we do not need to dwell too sharply on hardship. The history contains it, but the sleep story need not sharpen every edge. Let us instead notice the slower details. The water dark under overhanging branches, the smell of wet earth after rain, the fading light on a distant ridge, the way paddles drip silver for a moment before returning to the river, the hush that settles when a camp finally quiets and only frogs and distant insects remain. Under such a sky, even greed must lower its voice. The land makes everything move more slowly. It is this slowness, perhaps, that best explains why the legend did not burn out quickly. It smoldered. It spread like a thought, revisited night after night. It made room for expansion. The city might be farther east now. No, farther south. No, beyond a lake. No, near a plain. No, attached to a ruler whose name had shifted in the telling. It hardly mattered. The important thing was that it remained possible. Possibility, once gilded, can survive much more than fact. And whenever possibility began to glare too brightly, another image waited to soften it. The sacred lake near the Muisca highlands, where pieces of the old truth still rested beneath the water. Lake Guatavita came to occupy a place in the legend unlike any other, not because it could satisfy all the fantasies laid upon it, but because it preserved enough material truth to keep them alive. Its waters lay high among the uplands, held within steep banks that could make the lake seem self-contained, almost secretive, like an eye set quietly into the earth. The surface changed with the day. At dawn, it might appear gray and inward. Later, it might turn green or blue. Under certain light, it could shimmer with a warm metallic brightness that made the imagination work harder than it should. Mist often drifted there, gathering lightly over the water and then lifting. Reeds whispered. The air itself seemed cautious. Local memory associated the lake with sacred practice. Offerings had indeed entered its depths. Gold figures and ornaments, emeralds, crafted objects made for devotion rather than storage, had been given there over generations. The water, in this sense, held a real archive, though one never organized for the convenience of treasure seekers. What sank into Guatavita did not do so as forgotten property. It became part of a ritual history that only made sense if one accepted that value could be surrendered on purpose. Many who came later did not accept this, or accepted it only as far as it increased the possibility of recovery. If offerings had gone into the lake, then perhaps immense wealth rested below. If enough wealth rested below, perhaps the old stories of a golden kingdom were not exaggerations after all, but reflections of a submerged truth. Thus began the attempts to lower the water and expose the lake bed. Channels were cut, banks were opened, makeshift systems were devised to drain, or partially drain, what had never been meant to yield itself in this way. There is something almost haunting about these efforts. Not because they were efficient, they were not, but because they reveal how stubbornly hope can attach itself to even partial success. Some objects did emerge, fragments of worked gold, small ceremonial forms, pieces bright enough to excite the hand and mind together. Yet the great fantasy remained absent. No avenue, no chamber, no glittering accumulation, vast enough to justify the city that had grown in story. Just fragments, beautiful, meaningful fragments. but fragments all the same. And this partial revelation made the legend stronger in a strangely refined way. Had nothing been found, disbelief might have deepened more quickly. Had everything been found, the legend would have ended in inventory. But enough appeared to sustain the shimmer, while enough remained hidden to protect imagination. Guatavita offered confirmation and denial at once. Yes, there had been gold. No, not as you had hoped. Yes, the stories pointed back toward something real. No, not the reality you meant to conquer. Travelers wrote of the lake's atmosphere as often as they wrote of its potential riches. They noticed the silence. They noticed the way the cliffs and reeds enclosed the water, the way light moved upon the surface, the way mist could make the whole place feel suspended between ordinary landscape and something nearly ceremonial. Even those who came with greed could not entirely avoid the lake's effect. It made people lower their voices. It made them watch rather than merely seize. It suggested that treasure, if that is the word we use, might not always be improved by being brought to shore. For our purposes tonight, Guatavita is also a place of return. After the rumor drifts, after maps move, after expeditions spread across vast geographies, the lake gathers the narrative back into stillness. It reminds us that the legend El Dorado had a center once, and that the center was not architectural, but ritual. It was not streets and walls. It was water receiving brightness. It was an exchange between humans and the sacred. It was silence holding what had been offered. So let us remain there for a little longer. The bank is damp with morning. Reeds move softly. The water seems to hold the sky and something deeper beneath it. A small gold figure, cast long ago by attentive hands, lies somewhere below, unseen in the silt and dark. It is not asking to be retrieved. It is part of the lake now, and perhaps that is one of the quiet truths El Dorado offers. Not everything precious was ever meant to rise again into possession. By the closing years of the 16th century, the legend had already traveled far beyond the Muisca highlands. And with Sir Walter Raleigh, it entered yet another phase of enlargement. In 1595, he sailed toward Guyana, following reports of a city or kingdom sometimes called Manoa, radiant with wealth, set somewhere in the interior beyond the known coastal and riverine approaches. Raleigh was not the first man to nourish such hopes, nor the last, but he became one of the most influential because he wrote so vividly. His pages carried landscape and possibility together, and in doing so, they helped secure El Dorado a place not merely in rumor, but in literature, empire, and political ambition. Imagine the waterways of Guyana as Raleigh and his companions might have encountered them. Broad and dark in places, narrow and reed-lined in others, stretching inland beneath skies that shifted from clear brightness to sudden cloud and rain. Trees rose thick along the margins, floodplains opened and closed, waterfalls sent up drifting mist where light could catch it and scatter. The unfamiliarity of the terrain itself did much to support the legend. In landscapes so immense, so difficult to comprehend by inherited European measures, almost any grandeur could seem possible. Raleigh's descriptions attended to the land as much as to the dream within it. Green ridges layered into distance, rivers widened until they seemed almost without banks. Birds called in unfamiliar intervals, lagoons lay still under shifting sky. Yet, along with these observations came suggestion, and with suggestion came a renewed confidence that some vast inland wealth must exist. The city of gold, now detached from a particular ritual and increasingly from any particular geography, became at once more improbable and more influential. Raleigh's words carried the authority of a man who had gone looking. For many readers, that was enough to make the dream feel substantial. But again we notice the pattern. The farther the legend moves from its origin, the more it depends on writing to stabilize what direct finding cannot. Journals, letters, maps, royal ambitions, and repeated retellings all do the work that stone and gold cannot. El Dorado becomes durable through narration. It survives because it can be described more grandly than it can be reached. This is true of many myths, but especially of those bound to landscapes large enough to resist a final answer. At the same time, in the lands from which the earliest fragments had emerged, indigenous communities continued to understand gold in older ways. For them, the material still spoke through ritual, through ancestry, through relationships between human beings and the more than human world. The contrast between these views could not have been sharper. European ambition, measured by weight and yield. Indigenous reverence, measured by offering and significance. One asked how much could be possessed, the other asked what could be given properly. Both looked at gold. They did not see the same thing. This contrast gives the El Dorado story its deepest resonance. Without it, the legend would be only another failed treasure hunt. With it, the legend becomes a window into misunderstanding on a civilizational scale. A city of gold was sought because a sacred relationship to gold was not recognized. A kingdom of infinite wealth was imagined because the logic of offering looked from the outside like evidence of material excess. The dream was built in the space where one worldview could not imagine another except by translating it into its own appetite. And yet, even that appetite contributed, in a paradoxical way, to preservation. Because Europeans searched, wrote, mapped, exaggerated, and failed, the story did not vanish. It changed. It accumulated meanings. It became attached to landscapes beyond its point of origin. To men whose ambitions were imperial, to later writers and thinkers for whom El Dorado could symbolize desire itself. The original sacred meaning was obscured, but not erased. It remained under the legend, the way ritual offerings remained under the water. So as the myth expands with Raleigh, and with every shimmering inward map, let us allow it to do so slowly. Not as a sudden burst of conquest, but as a widening circle on dark water. A rumor enters a journal enters Europe. An imagined city gains contour. A contour gains symbolic force, all the while the rivers keep moving at their own pace, indifferent to the names pinned to them. Over the centuries that followed, certainty about a literal city of gold gradually softened. Not all at once, and not because human longing became wiser overnight, but because repeated searching, better surveys, changing intellectual fashions, and accumulated disappointment altered the tone in which El Dorado could be discussed. During the Enlightenment and after, there remained fascination, but it increasingly shared space with skepticism. The city might not exist as a place one could ride to and inventory. Yet the story did not fade. It simply became more available to interpretation. Writers, poets, philosophers, and later historians found in El Dorado a useful brightness. Some treated it as a warning about obsession and greed, about the human tendency to chase what recedes. Others treated it as a symbol of aspiration, of the unknown, of lands and ideas not yet fully charted. Because the city had never been found, it remained pliable. A discovered city becomes archaeology. An undiscovered city remains metaphor. El Dorado, by refusing to materialize as expected, escaped the limits that discovery would have imposed upon it. Modern archaeology, meanwhile, brought a quieter, but in many ways richer revelation. Excavations and careful scholarship across Colombia and neighboring regions illuminated the sophistication of the Muisca and related cultures. Ritual objects, toños, ornaments, metalwork, and other ceremonial evidence confirmed what the most patient readings of the older accounts had suggested. Gold had indeed entered sacred waters. Gold had indeed been central to acts of devotion and symbolic exchange. But no enormous hoarded city waited beneath the surface of the legend. What existed instead was a complex world of artistry, spirituality, trade, and environmental knowledge. This is not a lesser truth. It is, in many ways, the more beautiful one. A giant storehouse of metal might satisfy appetite, but a culture that understands gold as sunlight made tangible and fit for offering rather than greed, expands the imagination in a more lasting way. It asks us to loosen our own definitions of wealth. It suggests that a story can become grand, not because its object is large, but because its meaning is deep. Museums now hold some of the recovered artifacts. Visitors stand in climate-controlled rooms and look through glass at small radiant forms made centuries ago by hands that understood exactly what they were shaping. The metal still gleams, the emeralds still hold green light, yet their effect is different when seen with context. They do not whisper of inexhaustible vaults. They whisper of prayer, ceremony, ancestors, and sacred geography. They point not toward conquest, but toward relation. And perhaps that is where El Dorado finds its mature meaning. Not in the old question, where is the city? But in another set of quieter questions. What do human beings project upon distance? Why do some dreams grow more powerful when they cannot be verified? What happens when one system of value encounters another and mistakes reverence for abundance waiting to be seized? Why do legends that cannot be possessed continue to draw us, generation after generation, with more force than many truths we can measure directly? The answer may be that El Dorado speaks to something basic and enduring. It touches longing itself, not merely greed, though greed played its role. Longing, the wish that somewhere, beyond the horizon of ordinary life, there exists a place where meaning, beauty, wealth, and revelation come together in a form bright enough to transform the seeker. Some call that place fortune, some call it knowledge, some call it salvation, utopia, destiny, success, transcendence, or simply more. El Dorado survives because each age can pour its own hunger into the old golden outline. Yet the legend also offers correction. It reminds us that pursuit can distort what it seeks, that desire can misread devotion, that what glitters in one worldview may mean surrender rather than ownership in another. And perhaps, most gently of all, it suggests that some treasures perform their highest function by remaining partly unreachable. A dream fully captured becomes a possession. A dream that continues to shimmer just ahead remains alive. Here, then, is a softer understanding to rest beside. El Dorado may never have been a city defined, but it was always a story capable of changing those who followed it. Explorers crossed rivers because of it. Maps were redrawn because of it. Scholars studied forgotten objects because of it. Readers imagined interior worlds because of it. Museums now preserve artifacts with greater respect because of the questions it kept alive. The legend did not yield a city. It yielded a long conversation between ambition, misunderstanding, scholarship, memory, and wonder. And now, as that conversation quiets for the night, the land reappears beneath it all. The rivers are still there. They continue as they always have, indifferent to whether anyone calls their courses legendary or ordinary. They collect rain, branch, merge, bend, widen, and move on. Forests continue to breathe around them, leaf by leaf, root by root, shadow by shadow. Mountains continue lifting their pale ridges into cloud and starlight. Lakes continue holding sky in their surfaces, and in some cases, deeper histories beneath them. The landscape that inspired El Dorado did not vanish when the city failed to appear. It remained, and in remaining, it offered a final instruction in patience. Perhaps this is why the legend has never fully dimmed. It remains attached to places that resist closure. A river cannot be taken in all at once. A mountain cannot be understood from a single angle. A sacred lake cannot be exhausted by one draining attempt, one report, one artifact raised to the surface. Nature, in these stories, is not merely backdrop. It is one of the reasons the legend survives. The world itself keeps enough hidden to sustain reverence. And for the descendants of those who first gave meaning to these places, the story carries another continuity. Lakes remain sacred in memory and in practice, Ancestors remain near in ritual and inherited understanding. Objects recovered from the past still bear witness to a civilization whose richness was never dependent on Europe recognizing it correctly. The old offerings, whether still resting beneath water or preserved elsewhere with care, continue to say what they always said. Value is not only what can be counted. Meaning is not only what can be owned. As the legend enters modern memory, films and books and conversations continue to brighten it in new forms. El Dorado appears wherever people speak of unreachable wealth, of dream kingdoms, of the tension between reality and desire. Yet the gentlest version of the legend may be the most enduring one, a city that need not be found because it already exists where longing meets imagination. A story that continues not because its promise was fulfilled, but because its promise remained luminous. If we return once more to the sacred raft on the lake, to the gold dust catching dawn, to the offerings slipping beneath still water, we may notice that the oldest form of the story was never about taking. It was about giving, not about seizing light, but about returning light to the world in symbolic form. In that sense, the later treasure hunters inverted the legend almost completely. They mistook an act of surrender for an invitation to acquisition. Yet even that inversion, over time, has become part of the tale's strange beauty. It allows us to see more clearly what was lost in translation, and perhaps what can still be restored in understanding. So now, let the more restless parts of the story loosen. Let the maps fold closed. Let the expeditions drift into the background like campfire talk long after midnight. Let the names of explorers fade before the wider names of river, lake, mountain, rain, and sky. Let the city remain where it is strongest, not on a chart, not in a vault, but in the bright distance of the mind, just beyond possession. And if you like, hold one last image before sleep, a high lake before sunrise, reeds dark at the shore, mist lifting in fragile layers, a raft moving slowly outward, a figure touched with gold only for a moment, then the soft plunge into water, the brightness dissolving, the ripples widening, the surface becoming calm again. Nothing has been lost. It has only changed form. That may be the quiet gift of El Dorado, not a promise that the richest thing can be found, but the reminder that some forms of richness were never meant to stay in the hand. Some were meant to pass through light, story, reverence, and longing, and in doing so to remain alive much longer than any possession could. So let the rivers sleep now beneath the stars. Let the forests murmur in ancient voices too soft to fully catch. Let the mountains keep their patient watch. Let the lake hold its old gold in silence. Let the city remain unfound, and therefore undiminished. And let your own thoughts drift a little farther from wanting, and a little nearer to wonder. I hope this story has brought you calm, and that the quiet shimmer of it stays with you only as long as it is gentle. Until the next journey, may your rest be deep, your dreams unhurried, and your night full of soft and kindly darkness. There were other mornings, other camps, other journeys that looked at first like small variations on the same search, and yet carried their own textures. One expedition might begin in northern Andes, where the air was thin enough to make breath visible in the first pale light. Blankets would be damp with cold, leather stiffened overnight. Someone would coax a small flame from poor fuel, while mules shifted in the half-dark. Above them the ridges would be austere and nearly colorless until sunrise, and then suddenly touched with pink or gold. Down below, valleys opened into distances that seemed manageable only until one had begun crossing them. By afternoon, the same travelers might descend into warmer country, where everything changed. The earth darkened, moisture returned to the air, insects appeared in restless veils, tall grasses brushed at boots and stirrups. The sound of water thickened in the ears before the river itself came into view. Where the highlands had offered broad, exposed views, the lower country offered concealment. Trees gathered in complicated ranks, roots rose above the soil in old, knotted forms, The path narrowed or dissolved. Progress slowed not dramatically, but steadily, until hours seemed to pass inside a single shade. At such moments, the dream of El Dorado did not disappear. It refined itself. Men no longer imagined simply a city waiting beyond the next hill. They imagined clues, pathways, markers of approach. A village with finely worked ornaments might be one sign. A story told by a local intermediary might be another. A lake named with unusual reverence, a hill from which one could see farther, a river that local traders insisted led inland toward wealth. The legend adapted to the rhythm of travel. It became less a shining certainty and more a system of deferred possibility. And still, the land offered small encouragements. Gold was present in these worlds, but in ways European seekers were poorly prepared to understand. It appeared in personal adornment. It appeared in ceremonial form. It appeared not as the overflow of inexhaustible minds waiting to be appropriated, but as crafted meaning distributed through social and sacred life. To the impatient eye, each small object became an argument for excess hidden elsewhere. To the patient eye, each object might have suggested an entire symbolic economy richer than brute accumulation. Patience, however, was not the habit most rewarded by conquest. When rains came, they altered the journey without asking permission. Paths became slick, streams swelled, boats were drawn farther onto shore or pushed off more carefully. Clothing dried slowly. Food had to be watched. Journals, where they existed, were guarded against damp. Yet even rain could deepen the legend. Rain on leaves, rain on river surfaces, rain passing so heavily that the world disappeared and then returned again. All this made the interior seem more alive, more veiled, more likely to conceal a final revelation. The weather collaborated with the imagination. At night, lying under temporary shelter, or beneath a sky partly visible through branches, men spoke softly about what they had heard. One had seen a piece of gold unlike any he had handled before. Another had heard of a lake farther on, where offerings had long been made. Another insisted that beyond the next basin, there was said to be a settlement richer than all the rest. No account perfectly matched another, yet disagreement did not dissolve the myth. It multiplied it. If stories conflict, the hopeful mind concludes not that the legend is false, but that several routes perhaps point toward different edges of the same great secret. This is why the search for El Dorado expanded rather than converged. It was nourished by fragments and by travel conditions that made certainty difficult to maintain, but desire easy to preserve. The long geography of South America, its ridges, floodplains, marshes, plateaus, and interior waterways, did not simply conceal the legend. It taught it how to survive by always offering another horizon. The rivers deserved their own portion of the story, because so much of the searching happened not on dry land, but on moving water. A river journey alters the mind. It narrows immediate attention and widens distant expectation at the same time. The boat knows only the next curve and the pressure of current, but the imagination, freed from roads and fixed landmarks, keeps inventing what may lie ahead. Along some stretches, the banks draw near, draped in roots and vines, and the passage feels secretive, almost intimate. Along others, the water widens under a broad sky, and the traveler feels very small, borne across a bright sheet of reflected day. For European seekers, these rivers were often recorded as obstacles, channels, or lines of access. For those who had long lived with them, they were more than routes. They were living presences, storied and seasonal, capable of generosity and warning. To move upon them required attentiveness to current, wind, depth, reeds, flood, and local knowledge. A river bend might save time or cost it. A bank that appeared stable might dissolve after rain. A crossing easy in 1 month might become impossible in another. Such truths resist conquest because they must be learned in relationship, not imposed from above. And yet on these same waters, the legend brightened again and again. Light itself helped with that, midday sun striking ripples can make the surface flash with metallic intensities that disappear as soon as the eye settles on them. Sandbanks under shallow current can gleam strangely. Small fish turn and create momentary brightness. Reflections from wet leaves imitate ore. The world is full of false gold if one wishes badly enough to see it. This is not deception exactly. It is collaboration between longing and light. Imagine an evening canoe drifting after the work of the day has nearly ended. The paddles enter the water with less force now. The air has cooled slightly. Birds are changing their calls. Somewhere upstream, another group may be making camp, though they are out of sight. Ahead, the river seems to lead straight into shadow, yet one knows it must turn eventually. The talk grows softer. Someone mentions again the old tale of a ruler covered in gold powder. Someone else says that no, the story they heard was of a whole city where the walls shone. Another insists that these are not different tales at all, but pieces of one larger reality. The current listens and continues. Sleep stories benefit from such moments because they hold motion without agitation. Nothing dramatic must happen. The boat keeps moving. The bank keeps passing. Mist may begin to gather. A distant animal calls. The men in the boat do not know where the truth lies. But the uncertainty itself becomes gentle under evening light. The city does not need to appear. It only needs to remain possible long enough to carry them and us through another bend. Another night, another dream of interior brightness. And after the river comes a return, always a return. The legend may widen through motion, but its deeper pulse still belongs to stillness. So after oars and currents and repeated hopes, we come back once more to the image of sacred water, untroubled by pursuit. We remember Guatavita. We remember the Muisca chief, glimmering only for a moment before entering the lake. We remember that the first gold in this story was not pursued. It was given in that memory. The river's endless forward motion finds its counterweight. Lake Guatavita was not the only place where sacred offering and golden imagination touched, but it became the emblem because it could be pointed to. A traveler could be taken to its edge. A description could fix upon it. A map could circle it. It had enough physical presence to attract those who demanded locations, and enough ceremonial history to keep the old story alive beneath their demands. It was both specific and elusive, and legends thrive under precisely those conditions. Those who approach the lake often describe not only the possibility of wealth, but the atmosphere around it. The banks rose steeply in places, making descent awkward and the water feel contained. Reeds swayed in patterns too subtle to be called wind alone. Dawnlight took time to gather across the surface, and when it did, it often seemed to brighten from below rather than from above. By afternoon, the whole lake might appear almost too still, as though movement beneath it had been restrained on purpose. Such impressions matter, because they made the place feel suitable to legend even before any object was recovered. Attempts to drain the lake reveal as much about European desire as the ritual reveals about Muisca devotion. To lower a sacred body of water in search of what had been offered to it is to refuse its symbolic integrity and insist instead upon material legibility. The lake was to become an archive that would finally surrender its contents to counting. Yet water is rarely obedient. Channels break, mud collapses. Depth conceals what labor cannot efficiently expose. The very nature of the basin resisted reduction to a ledger. And still, enough emerged to stir delight. A small golden figure brought up through mud, a bell, a crafted ornament. Little things, each one capable of confirming to the seeker that the larger story might yet be somewhere nearby or below. How easy it is for a fragment to sustain a fantasy already prepared to outgrow it. A ceremonial object designed for offering becomes, in another hand, evidence. Evidence becomes promise. Promise becomes renewed labor. The lake does not give everything, and therefore the search cannot end. There is a melancholy beauty in this. if one is willing to look past the violence of misunderstanding. The seekers came to claim. The lake answered with partial revelation and persistent silence. In doing so, it preserved the tension that made the story immortal. Had Guatavita yielded some monstrous trove, El Dorado might have been reduced to a historical incident. Had it yielded nothing at all, many would have dismissed the tale more quickly. By yielding traces, it kept reverence and appetite bound together uneasily. If we step away from the treasure-seeking frame for a moment, the lake offers a quieter lesson. It teaches that sacred acts leave residue even when their full meaning is forgotten. The objects remain, the place remembers, the ritual, once misunderstood, still radiates through atmosphere. A visitor standing at the edge may not know the details, but may still feel that the water is not ordinary water. That feeling is part of the inheritance, not proof, not data, but a tone, a gathered silence. Let us keep that tone. The expedition narratives have their pull. But Guatavita asks for another pace. Here one should lower the voice. Here one should watch light moving on water long enough to notice how quickly certainty dissolves into reflection. Here one can almost imagine the raft again. The powders and bowls, the low drums, the waiting crowd, the brief brilliance before immersion. In the presence of such an image, the later city of gold begins to feel oddly loud and slightly clumsy. The older story is finer grained. It survives because it asks for attention rather than possession. When Raleigh carried the legend toward Guyana and Manoa, he was not merely extending geography. He was participating in the transformation of El Dorado from localized rumor into imperial literature. His words gave distant readers a landscape through which to imagine magnificent. They offered waterways, interior expanses, and mountain-backed horizons in which impossible wealth could seem almost logical. Such writing does not invent out of nothing. It intensifies. It selects details that support wonder and arranges them so that uncertainty becomes fertile rather than diminishing. Guyana, in Raleigh's telling and in later retellings shaped by his influence, was a region of eagle, dark rivers, and luminous possibility. The interior seemed both difficult and generous, concealing more than it revealed. That concealment was essential. If all could be clearly seen, dream would collapse into knowledge. Instead, the rivers wound onward. The forest layered distance with shadow, and every account of a settlement farther in made the absent city feel not ridiculous, but suspended. Manoa could exist because no one had yet exhausted the landscapes in which it was placed. For Europe, these accounts arrived at a time when wonder itself had become politically useful. Kingdoms wanted advantage, investors wanted return, rivalries among powers sharpened the appetite for reports of fabulous interior realms. A city of gold was not only a fantasy of wealth, it was a fantasy of decisive geopolitical gain. Whoever reached it first would not merely become rich. They would reconfigure the balance of ambition. Under such pressures, doubt becomes difficult to sustain. The legend must remain credible enough to justify further movement. Yet once again we see the old pattern. The legend's strength comes from being detailed just enough to feel embodied and vague enough to resist disproof. A river is named, a route is suggested, a distant ruler is mentioned. Hills, floodplains, and settlements are described. The city remains always beyond the described zone. This beyondness is its true residence. The city lives in the space just past the report. That is one reason why El Dorado belongs so naturally in a sleep story. It is not in the end a thing. It is a bright distance. It appears at the edge of a line of thought, asks us to follow, and then recedes into another landscape, another era, another text. It does not vanish entirely, because it leaves traces of gold on the mind. But neither does it settle fully into possession. It remains dream adjacent. So as the legend widens through Raleigh and through all who wrote after him, let us keep the emotional emphasis in the right place. Not on imperial victory, not on the hard shine of conquest, on the movement of the dream, on the way a sacred story, once misunderstood, became large enough to absorb whole continents of longing, on the way journals, maps, and letters brightened that longing without ever resolving it, on the quiet strangeness of a city that grew more real in imagination each time reality failed to deliver it. And then, after such widening, after Guyana and Noah and the great interior dream, we can lower back down into the deeper question. What, exactly, were people longing for when they spoke of El Dorado? Only gold? Or also proof that the world still held something unmatched? Something waiting to overturn the ordinary scale of human life? Perhaps both. Perhaps that is why the legend endured. It offered money to the greedy, wonder to the imaginative, and a horizon to those who could not bear the thought that the world had already shown all it meant to show. To understand why El Dorado lasted, we must spend some quiet time beside the difference between possession and offering. It is a difference simple enough to say and difficult enough to truly inhabit. In much of Europe, during the age of exploration, gold was assessed through weight, trade, reserve, power, and visible wealth. It could finance armies, reassure crowns, stabilize ambition, adorn institutions, and accumulate in ways that suggested mastery over both people and distance. Gold was measurable. It could be counted, guarded, taxed, and desired in familiar terms. For the Muisca, and for neighboring traditions in related ways, gold lived inside another moral and spiritual arrangement. It could certainly signify importance. It could certainly be worked with exquisite care, but the significance did not end in retention. Gold could be given away to water. It could mediate between human beings and ancestors, between earthly order and divine relation. Its brightest role might be temporary, a leader dusted with it at dawn, a figure cast for ritual offering, an ornament shaped not to increase a private cache, but to complete a sacred gesture. Under such a view, wealth circulates through meaning. It is not destroyed when given, it is fulfilled. The tragedy and fascination of El Dorado lie partly in what happens when these two systems of value encounter one another without mutual understanding. Europeans saw evidence of gold and inferred undeclared stores. They saw offerings and inferred excess. They heard sacred stories and recoded them as clues, because they could not imagine that large quantities of worked metal might be made only to be relinquished. They concluded that still larger quantities must remain somewhere in reserve. Thus, a ritual language became economic rumor, devotion became treasure map, reverence became bait. This is not merely a historical mistake, it is a pattern of thought with broad human application. We often misread what another culture, another person, or another landscape values when we assume it must value according to our own hunger. El Dorado becomes enduring because it shows how powerful such projection can be. The city of gold was not found because, in one sense, those seeking it were never really looking at what was before them. They were looking at their own desires reflected back by a bright and unfamiliar world. Modern scholarship has helped repair some of this misreading. Archaeologists and historians, working with care rather than conquest, have pieced together Muisca material culture and ceremonial practices in ways that restore dignity to the origins of the legend. Small golden tunjos, preserved in museums, do not ask to be read as breadcrumbs toward a lost metropolis. They ask to be read as objects of meaning in themselves. Emeralds ask to be understood not only as gemstones, but as carriers of symbolic and ritual significance. Sacred lakes ask to be approached as sites of relation, memory, and cosmology. And once one begins to see this, El Dorado changes yet again. It becomes less a failed treasure hunt and more a story about interpretive humility. It asks us what kinds of blindness emerge from greed, but also what kinds of deeper seeing become possible when greed loosens its grip. It asks us to imagine wealth not only in vaults and currencies, but in continuity, craft, reverence, and ecological belonging. It asks us to slow down enough to let another civilization's values remain intact, rather than translating them immediately into our own. Such slowing is good for sleep and good for history. It allows the mind to stop grasping. It lets the legend breathe in a less hurried way. It lets us feel the quiet strength of the older image. The lake receiving what is offered, the gold not as accumulation, but as brightness entering depth. Under that image, the noisy city of gold becomes secondary. It is almost a misunderstanding we carry, so that we can gradually release it. And perhaps that release is the richest ending available to the story. Not disappointment, not triumph, recognition, the understanding that some legends are most valuable, not when they are solved, but when they lead us back toward a wiser way of seeing what was there all along. By the 19th and 20th centuries, the landscape of inquiry had changed. The fevered confidence that a literal golden city might yet be found had cooled, though not vanished entirely, from popular imagination. Scientific surveys, archaeological excavation, and more careful historical method replaced many of the older habits of speculative certainty. This shift mattered, not because it made the story less luminous, but because it changed the kind of truth one could seek within it. Researchers studying the Muisca and related cultures found no enormous city paved in precious metal. What they found instead was evidence of a sophisticated society embedded in trade networks, ritual systems, environmental knowledge, and artistic practice. Gold objects emerged not as signs of hidden empire in the European sense, but as signs of ceremonial and symbolic worlds that had long deserved attention on their own terms. The recovered artifacts were often small. That smallness is important. It reminds us that historical depth does not always announce itself through grand scale. Sometimes it survives in delicacy. A finely cast figure, no larger than the hand, can preserve more cultural meaning than a room full of imagined treasure. A ritual object, once understood, can illuminate worldview, hierarchy, devotion, craft, and cosmology at once. The smallness of such objects invites intimacy rather than conquest. One must lean in to see them. One must let the eye adjust to line, proportion, and symbolism. In museums, they gleam under controlled light, no longer beneath sacred water, but still carrying the memory of having been made for more than ornament. There is something restful in this turn from fantasy to detail. It does not extinguish wonder, it relocates it. Wonder moves from the imagined scale of a city to the real sophistication of a people. It moves from the impossible hoard to the meaningful object. It moves from conquest to interpretation. Such relocation may seem quieter, but it is also more durable. A false city can collapse. A recovered history can deepen indefinitely, and still the legend survives in popular form, films, novels, school book simplifications, casual conversation, and collective memory continue to brighten El Dorado into the shorthand of unreachable wealth. This persistence should not irritate us too much. Legends are not obedient to archives. They continue because they satisfy imaginative needs that documents alone cannot address. The task, perhaps, is not to banish the legend, but to let it carry more than one truth, the shimmering dream and the grounded history beneath it. So if someone says El Dorado and imagines streets of gold, one can allow the image to glow for a moment. Then one can add the lake, one can add the gilded chief at dawn, one can add the Muisca understanding of gold as sunlight and offering. One can add the long river journeys, the maps that move, the partial recoveries at Guatavita, the journals of Raleigh, the archaeological fragments, the museums, the enduring contrast between greed and reverence. The legend grows finer when layered with truth. It need not be stripped of brightness to become more real. And in a story for sleep, this may be the best kind of historical ending. Not one that shuts a door, but one that opens more patient doors behind the first. The city of gold was never found, and yet the story continues to reveal human longing, colonial misunderstanding, sacred practice, material beauty, and the way landscapes absorb centuries without surrendering all their meanings at once. The forest remains green, the river remains slow, the artifact remains bright. The legend remains unfinished enough to dream aside. Let us drift once more through the landscape, with all this gathered gently inside it. Not as a list of findings, not as a final lecture, but as memory returning to place. Dawn over the northern forests, mist hanging low among roots and ferns, rivers spreading through valleys, some cold from mountain birth, some already thick with the warmth of low country. The first light on a lake, uncertain at first, then brightening until the surface seems to hold a thin layer of gold that no hand can grasp. These were always the first conditions of the legend. Without them, no city would ever have been imagined. Without them, no ritual would have taken shape. Without them, no rumor would have found its shine. It is easy, when speaking of El Dorado, to let the human search occupy too much of the frame. Yet the legend lasts partly because the land outlasts all who pursued it. Generations came and went, crowns shifted, maps improved, ambitions sharpened and softened. Expeditions set out and failed to find what they expected. Journals were written and read, scholars corrected earlier errors. Museums assembled collections, and still the rivers continued without altering their course for any of this. Still, the mountains wore cloud and starlight. Still, the lakes received dawn. The landscape is not passive in the story. It is the great patient witness. Perhaps this is why the legend finally rests more easily in the imagination than on the page of any map. The world that generated it remains too alive to be fully reduced. Forests hold sound differently from stone cities. Water refuses fixed borders. Light makes promises it does not intend to keep in literal form. A glint on a reed-framed shore can suggest treasure for an instant, and then become only sunlight again. Such moments are small, but they educate the dream. They teach it to persist at the edge of certainty for the people who first told the older story. This persistence would not have been surprising. Sacred places do not need to resolve themselves for outsiders. They remain what they are. They ask different things of those who approach them. Reverence sees one world. Appetite sees another. The same lake can receive a gift or provoke an excavation. The same gold can become prayer or ledger. El Dorado, in its longest life, has held both ways of seeing together, not peacefully, but revealingly. It shows what the human mind does when faced with radiance. It cannot immediately classify. And so as night deepens around us now, we can let the harsher edges recede. Let the conquistadors become distant shapes beneath a broad sky. Let the arguments of investors and crown officials dissolve into the rustle of reeds. Let the sounds of tools at Guatavita fall quiet. Let the pages of Raleigh's journals close gently. What remains when all that noise settles? Water mist, gold dust at dawn, a small figure sinking into sacred depth. That is the gentler El Dorado, not absent, not disproved, but transformed. A city that brightens most when it is left untouched. A treasure that enlarges when it is no longer measured. A legend that survives because it belongs partly to history and partly to the beautiful human habit of imagining one more radiance beyond the visible line of the world. So now, let the story come to rest, the way a boat comes to rest when the paddling stops and the current takes over. There is no need to force a conclusion sharper than the landscape itself. The forest does not close with a sentence. The river does not end because a tale about it has ended. The lake does not empty its depths simply because generations have stared into them. El Dorado, too, is better left with a little distance around it, a little luminous uncertainty, a little room to breathe on its own. If you wish, imagine the sacred lake one final time, not in the bright urgency of pursuit, but in the deep calm of memory. The shore is quiet, reeds move with the smallest motion of evening air. The water is dark now, yet not empty. It carries the sky softly. Somewhere beneath, among silt and shadow, rest objects once offered with intention and care. They are not lonely there. They belong to the lake's long remembering. Above, stars begin to appear, one by one, and the darkness grows more tender than obscure. Think, too, of the mountains beyond, their outlines barely visible now, holding the last pale traces of day. Think of the rivers continuing through night, silver only where the moon finds them. Think of forests, breathing in cool layers of leaf and moisture. Think of museums far away where small golden figures now stand under soft light, carrying into the present a memory of hands, ceremonies, and meanings that refuse to disappear. Think of readers and listeners across centuries, each receiving some altered version of the old story and adding their own longing to it. In that long chain of imagining, the legend has never truly stopped being made. Perhaps the greatest treasure here was never gold at all. Perhaps it was the capacity of a story to survive misunderstanding and still carry beauty, to survive ambition and still reveal reverence, to survive disappointment and still inspire wonder. El Dorado did this. It moved from ritual to rumor, from rumor to quest, from quest to symbol, from symbol to reflective history, and through each change, it kept a small core of light, not the hard light of possession, the softer light of mystery. And that softer light is enough for tonight, enough to let the mind loosen its hold on answers, enough to let the city remain where it has always been strongest, half in memory, half in dream, and wholly unwound. Let it remain among rivers that are older than maps, among lakes that guard what they receive, among mountains that look patient under stars. Let it remain golden, only in the way light becomes golden on water for a passing moment, and then slips away. You do not have to find El Dorado tonight. No one ever truly did. You only have to rest near the thought of it, near the shimmer, near the idea that some forms of wealth become clearer when the hand opens and the mind grows still. Let the old city stay beyond reach. Let the reeds whisper. Let the water darken into peace. Let the bright dust dissolve back into the lake. Let the river carry the last of the story onward without asking you to follow farther. And as sleep draws nearer, may the forests of that far green world feel kind in your imagination. May the rivers move gently through whatever thoughts are left. May the mountains keep watch without weight. May the sacred lake hold its quiet gold beneath a sky full of patient stars. And may you drift easily into rest, carrying with you only the calmest truth of all, that some treasures are most beautiful when they remain luminous, distant, and free.